My name is Jean Oelwang and I work with Virgin Unite. I'm the CEO there. It basically means I'm clearing the runways for the rest of the team. Virgin Unite, we're the not-for-profit foundation of the Virgin Group, and we're really like a catalytic engine that looks at how do we get our 80 businesses and other businesses to really put people and planet at their core, and how do we create new ways of approaching global leadership. I think the greatest challenge is waking up every morning and thinking, my gosh, this is madness that we're headed in this direction and we're not moving quickly enough to drive change. So I think our greatest challenge is how do you get to the speed and the scale that you need to really tackle the issues that we're facing right now. And a big part of that is how do we turn upside down the way the world does business? How do we really screw business as usual to make sure that every single business is thinking about people and planet in all they do? Yeah, I think it's a lot slower than it needs to be. I think, if you looked at where we came from, the industrial age, and how since that period of time, really, we've been degrading our natural assets, we've been building individual wealth based on common assets. And it's got us into a mode where we're all headed in that direction and we're not stepping back and looking and thinking this is unacceptable where we're headed right now. And if we don't stop, if we don't come together as a community and stop that direction, then we're going to be headed for a disaster, because we're rapidly, every single major ecosystem is in decline right now. It's not sustainable. So I think from my perspective, how we're changing and shifting, we're seeing some great grassroots ideas come up, some fantastic, heroic entrepreneurs on the front lines driving change, but we're not seeing them go to scale quickly enough. And I think that's what we need to do right now, is think as a community, how do we come together and really scale things? Yes, I guess we're working on a number of levels, because we feel strongly that it has to be top, but it also has to be middle and it has to be bottom up. We have to work really at all levels to drive this change and come together as a community. And some of the things that we're doing is, first and foremost, we're working within our own businesses so that we can hopefully lead by example and look at how we turn them upside down. Because I guess we passionately believe that every single business should have positive impact. It shouldn't be just one specific asset class, but it should be every business thinking about how they can use all of their assets to drive change in the world. So starting with our businesses, how do we make sure that we're driving change? And then also looking at all of our community, all of our staff, all of our customers, to just simply get them to try to think of everything they do through a people and planet lens. So every aspect of their work, how do they shift that and turn that upside down? And then at the top level, one of the things we're doing is bring together something called the B Team, which is a group of powerful business leaders that have basically been part of the problem right now, of how they come out and say, this is how we want to start turning that upside down and being part of the solution. So looking at things, for example, like how do we get more capital into great investments that are changing the world? So how do we move foundations? How do we move businesses to start putting more capital into those organizations? How do we look at shifting fossil fuel subsidies into renewable subsidies? How do we look at going from short-term reporting to long-term reporting? So a number of things about how do you use those leaders' voice to really drive those key leverage points. I think that people really want to drive change. I feel like the world is now moving in the right direction. I think, for the last decade, you started to see this huge shift. 10 years ago, you talked to people about business as a force for good and their eyes would glaze over. But I really feel strongly that we're starting to see that shift right now. So people want to. I think one of the issues is we're not creating the right ecosystem for them to be able to do that. We don't allow them to go to long-term reporting. We're still forcing them down the route of short-term reporting. We're not getting capital to the right places so that they can drive change. We're still stuck in our old mode of just creating profit and not thinking about people and planet as part of that. And I think that's changing now. I think there's three things that will force it to change more rapidly. I think one is that these social media tools are really now, no brand owns their own brand. I think that people in the streets own brands, and so I think people will start to put pressure upward. I think in the middle layer we're starting to see unbelievable companies starting to emerge that are purpose-driven and putting people and planet, so they're going to put competitive pressure. And we've started to see that, things like method cleaning, Sungevity on the solar side, a whole host of examples of organizations that are purpose-driven starting to drive that change. And I think the exciting thing is, there used to be lone voices like Ray Anderson 10 years ago, and now there's people like Paul Polman coming from Unilever or Jochen Zeitz from Puma that are starting to speak out. So I think that leadership voice is starting to come. So for me, the exciting thing is those three things will hopefully start to give more permission to people to change the way they do business. Absolutely critical. I think that's probably one of the most critical things, because I think in my generation, our generation right now, we've lost that sense of Bill Drayton puts it so eloquently around empathy. We've lost that ability to realize that it's not okay to just live our lives as individuals and not think about people, whether they're in our own direct community or on the other side of the world. So I think this next generation, what I've seen so far is that they're coming up right now with that essence of that realization that we have to change the way we do business. And again, when we go out and talk to young people, it's so inspiring because they have that at their core, and now it's our job to help make sure that they can live that dream and live that vision. We were just in Egypt a couple weeks ago, and the young entrepreneur stood up and so eloquently put it, where the world, the only borders that are in the world right now are those that are on maps. There's no longer any borders, so we need to all think of how we work together better. I think there's so many terms it almost makes it more confusing now. I think, I think again, the impact investment is a good one because every investment should have impact. I mean, I think going back to that core, but for us, we just use the term screw business as usual internally, because we feel strongly that that gives the essence of it has to be radical change. We have to make it quickly, and it has to be about totally turning upside down the way we do business and putting people and planet at the very core of everything we do. Media has a huge role to play. I think one of the issues that we have right now is that media's gone down such a path of binary arguments. So you have on one side, for years media talked about philanthropy on one side and they talked about commercial profit making on the other side. And I think what we need to get media to realize is that there's no longer that binary division, and it's really all one continuum now. And media can really celebrate those new hybrid models in the middle that are starting to emerge and celebrate this new way of doing business. And they don't do that enough right now. So I think getting their voice in there will help transform the sector and help get businesses to realize that they no longer continue the way they're doing business. They have to make this shift. Yeah, I think online education, I think we're very bad at storytelling. I think how do we capture people's stories in a way that's going to capture people's imaginations? I think in the past we focused very much on fear, the world's going to end if we don't do X, Y, Z, and now it needs to be about actually the biggest opportunity of our lifetime is creating businesses that drive change. And how can we take that opportunity and start to share these stories of these wonderful businesses that are starting to emerge right now, whether they be purpose-driven, whether they be social enterprise, and using those voices of those people who have created these businesses as heroes and starting to put them out there to encourage lots of other people to follow in their footsteps. Yeah, I mean, I think like Sal Khan on the education side is just a great story of some social enterprise based that he was created in his home for his cousins, and now has become something that millions of people are benefiting from his videos around education that he's created. So to me, he's a good example of someone that's starting to turn a whole sector upside down and start to show a way that education can be done in a different way. I think, there's loads of good examples of organizations like Participant Media with Jeff Skoll, who really believe that media and film could change the world, and he's created a business now that's doing just that. So I think he's a great example of that as well. I think Leapfrog, a great example of an organization that is now serving millions of people with insurance by aggregating insurance companies around the world and serving that population that wasn't served with insurance before. Or mobile phone companies all over the world. Now they're all starting to think about how can that be a tool to drive change, whether that be M-Pesa, that's giving financial services to the poor, whether that be health initiatives now that are allowing people to basically have doctor services or health services in places in rural areas they never would have had access to that. So I think there's hundreds of stories. I think the issue is we're just not telling them loud and speaking them loud enough. Yeah, I mean, I think our big goal right now is how does the world really screw business as usual? How do we turn that upside down? How do we make sure that our 80 companies are breathing and living that? Because we're on a journey right now. Some of them are doing great stuff, some of them have a ways to go. So one of our key objectives is showing by example that our businesses can be turned upside down. And then also in parallel with that, starting to celebrate and spread stories of businesses that are already making that change happen. So how can we get their voices amplified? And I think the second objective that Unite really has is we feel passionately that global systems are broken and we don't have the right leadership in place. Because it's great to have distributed leadership, but you also need those reinventors who are going to yell out and amplify it and make it go to scale. And so how do we create these new models of leadership that lead purely on behalf of humanity? So things like the Elders, the Carbon War Room are things we're really passionate about. How do you make sure that those entities are driving the change they need to in the world? Yeah, the Carbon War Room was an idea that was set up now probably about 3 years ago, and the concept behind the Carbon War Room was really about how do you take business-based models to really reduce carbon in the world, because there's lots of models that work, lots of technology that works, we just haven't brought them to scale. So there's a great leadership team led by Jose Maria Figueres, the former president of Costa Rica, who then what they do now is they look industry by industry to look at what things can be turned upside down so that we can move more capital in and break down barriers to get those markets to go to scale. So a few examples of what they're working on. One is the shipping industry, and when they looked at the shipping industry, what they found is that people just didn't know which ships were efficient and which weren't. So we worked with a partner and came up with a shipping efficiency index. So now thousands of ships, you can go online and find out what their efficiency level is. So now they're taking that to the next level where they've just helped a few companies look at changing the way that they purchase their shipping capacity to make sure that it's on efficient ships, and working with governments now to look at how can you give shipping companies who are efficient benefit when they land into a port. So in a nutshell, the Carbon War Room is all about going into industry by industry, breaking down barriers to get capital flowing so that we can bring good investments that are going to drive change in that sector. Yeah, and I think it all fundamentally comes down to how do we reinvent how we live and work in the world, each one of us in everything we do, and putting that people and planet lens on everything we do, whether that be in our personal life or whether that be in our work life. I think also a really exciting thing is how do we mimic what Mother Nature has been doing, because she's had 3 billion years of research. So how do we build businesses, how do we build our daily actions, mimicking what she's done so well for so long and creating that effective ecosystem. So I think that's a really exciting movement that's happening right now around biomimicry as well. And I think it's, for us, we try to again put it simply in language of how every day can you screw business as usual. When you go into work every day, how can you think of how you work differently to make sure that what you're doing is good for people and planet. Yeah, I think impact investing, hats off to people like Jed Emerson and others that have been working on this for decades. And I think it's finally now starting to come into a point where people are grasping the importance of it and grasping the importance of turning the way we do business upside down. I think for me, the important thing is to remember that it is not just one specific asset class, that it's not just the new businesses that are coming up, but it's taking existing businesses and looking at how do you radically transform them and get investment in them to make sure that we radically transform them. And I think one of the key things is not just how we get capital flowing, because I believe there's capital out there and I believe that there's people that want to invest in things that are going to drive change, but it's also how do we get people to know how they can make those investments. And that's the gap that I see right now that needs to be filled, is how do we connect people more rapidly to investments that are driving change so they can use their capital but also their resources to bring them to scale. I think it goes back to looking at the media. How can the media start to promote more stories about these great businesses that are emerging and about the importance of and need for business to change? I think it's supporting and giving ground cover and air cover to leaders that are starting to speak out, like the Paul Polmans and the Jochen Zeitz, and making sure that they're supported in the change and the transformation that they're making. I think it's connecting the right people with one another as well. So there's great stories on the front line that need to be heard, and so how do we make sure that all of us are storytelling and making sure that we're putting together the right people that can connect and drive change together. Mainstream TV series would be great, and I think it's then how you bring that mainstream TV series to life to do stuff so that you get people connecting, because that face-to-face as well can never be replaced. I guess 2 big life-changing points for me in my life. I was a Vista volunteer years and years ago, and I'd come from the business sector and went in and worked in a homeless shelter in Center City, Chicago. And when I was there, watching these kids walk in the door every day just made me realize how broken our systems were and how government, not-for-profits, and businesses were all letting these young people down because we weren't providing jobs for them, we weren't providing the right support from a welfare perspective, and we weren't catching them in our social sector, and they were falling through the cracks. So to me, that was a big point of change in my life, to think about how do we radically change these broken systems. And then I think the second point was I've been really lucky to help start up mobile phone companies in mainly emerging markets, and was in South Africa and in the mid-90s, and just saw how that mobile phone made such a big difference to people in the townships and how it transformed them and put the right tool in their hand for them to drive change and live the life of dignity that they deserved. And so that was really a realization for me of business and how business has to be a force for good. So those are probably the two turning points in my life for me. Okay, my name is Jean Oelwang. I'm with Virgin Unite. We're the not-for-profit foundation of the Virgin Group, and we're really a catalyst for business as a force for good.